Yo, I need the Facebook live stream though, so I can post it on my stuff. I can't even go live until I have that because I can't need to post that. Link. Come, come. Let's go. It's gonna be here. Dun. Record start. Wait, what's that? Start playing that. Yeah, record. Start.
And cause her to have an early,
Oh.
do you know what I mean? Go into the
Yeah.
early labour.
Whoa. Massive. What's going on? Stop that. But wait, bro. You can hear me, but something is bugging here. Bro, the carts are not working. Bro, the carts are not working. Look, when I press one, it goes. Hello. Hi. Once again, we are back. Friday night, Friday special. Today's episode, a debate on democracy. That's the debate. Talk to me. Democracy. It's enshrouded in everyday life, in everyday society, politics, economics. It's literally what governs our day-to-day thinking. Has it spiraled into something uncontrollably detrimental? Is it still the forefather, the leading political philosophy that's going to govern our today's episode, a debate on democracy. This detrimental and diabolical political philosophy that's allowed us to just walk through life and not really have no say, and allow those who do have the say and the power to manipulate our thoughts and our feelings to actually make decisions, which, if you think about it, is actually crazy. Very crazy. So, yeah, man. Like I said, that's what we're going to go through. We're going to talk about This is before we know, yeah, this is the context I'm gonna give you guys to understand why this is crazy. Yeah, so the forefathers, or supposed the foundation of democracy, yeah, Athens, Greece, Socrates, Plato, all of them, yeah. But what I found out, which is very interesting, well, not found out, but no, I found out one day because I wasn't born with the knowledge, of course, but found out during my time is that Socrates actually was not a supporter of democracy. That he actually didn't believe that not every single person has the intellectual property and disposition to have the actual ability to vote, because he actually gave the argument that giving people who don't have the ability or the intellectual understanding to make these decisions is almost like giving people who have never ever ridden, sailed a boat, the power to ride a boat, or saying to them, yo, jump on this boat and fly to or go to wherever in a storm. Do you get it? It's like you can't give people who have never had no knowledge on political philosophy or political theory and say to them, vote for who you think is going to be the best person to run your country. People who have no understanding of economics, of so many things, are out here being manipulated by mass media, fake news, by so many things. So that's what I think. It might not be true. My guest might actually say to me, "Yo, this as much as there's been a lot of negatives and a lot of, I guess, what you can say, what you can say as more negatives than positives. That maybe that's just a negativity bias, which I'll be looking at through my lens of what democracy has done for me. So it's gonna be a good debate. Um, the person who I'm bringing is her name is Jacqueline Kennelly. She actually has studied and done research about democracy in all different places. She studied what something very close to me in particular. She studied the gentrification of Newham pre and post the Olympics. So what has democracy actually done for us in our own community? And for someone to do this all the way from Canada is, for me, is it's inspiring, it's interesting, and I guess there's nothing further I can do but to introduce her. So Jackie, hello.
Hello.
Come on. Guys, yeah, you're gonna expect a bit of a delay, but hi Jackie, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm even better now that now that you've joined
Good.
us. How are you on this Friday afternoon, should I say, for you?
Yeah, it's Friday afternoon. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Just hanging out in my house like everyone else in the world right now under the pandemic.
Yeah, man.
But
I get
you
you.
know, it.
It's
But
had
it's
us
good.
thinking.
I've got a nice house.
Oh, that's all right. That's not
What's
too
that?
bad then.
Yeah.
I said this COVID, this lockdowns had us thinking, had us plugged into, had us reflecting about is the society really made for us? Well, that's what it's had me thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I think it's raised a lot of questions.
So I'm gonna hit you with a big one straight away. Okay,
Yep.
democracy.
Go for it.
Is it the best we have? Is it the best thing we got at the moment to govern society?
So I think the answer is that I can't give that a yes or no.
Okay,
That
why?
I mean, first we need to, and I think this is what what you want to do with this discussion is kind of unpack what we mean by democracy,
I like
and
that.
then
I like that.
consider whether what we're living in is yeah,
Okay.
whether what we are living in, and you and I in Britain and in Canada have very similar systems. Is it actually democratic?
That is a very good
So
question.
that's where I would start.
All right. So
Hmm.
that, I guess the question then becomes, what I think will be quite cool is maybe a comparison like UK, Canada, etc.
Hmm.
See if Trudeau's treating you guys better over there on that side of the pond.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll start with
Yep.
Canada. Do you like who I from what I see, my perspective at the moment is that probably one of the most liberal and countries that are taking the most accountability in a time when, I guess,
Hmm.
democracy, which obviously, like, like it was part of the civilization mission. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was we're gonna democratize the world.
Hmm. Hmm.
Most of the countries who did that are still like hiding
Hmm.
behind that banner. Whereas I would say Canada is actually maybe kind of like decolonize almost and like lose that legacy and actually take the accountability. So
Mm.
what would you say is the democratic
Mm.
state of Canada at the moment?
So I'm glad you raised this issue of decolonizing, because I think so. Canada I know they continue to have a really strong reputation globally for exactly what you just described, for being more democratic, for being concerned about human rights and justice and all that. And I think that is true in part, but it also conceals a whole lot about Canadian history that even our own citizens don't learn about. So Canada, the nation of Canada, which was a colony of Britain and of France, and then united under Britain eventually, gained independence in 1867, is built on white nationalism. It's built on racism, and the founding of the country was about creating space for white people. Really quite explicitly, actually, if you look at parliamentary debates and that kind of thing, and legislation, it was about protecting white men in particular. White women were considered to be part of the package, but they weren't. Women didn't have the vote or anything.
It wasn't made for them.
No. So Canada, the country as it is now, it's a settler colonial state. It's built on racism. It's built on the attempted eradication of Indigenous peoples. It's built on, systematic exclusion of people from Asian countries, of people from the Caribbean. Like Canada likes to sort of wave the flag of being the country where slaves would escape from the U.S. to come to Canada and the Underground Railroad, and that is true. Yeah. But what's also true is that Canada also was a slave-owning country. I mean, before it was Canada, it was still the British.
It still had a
British
legacy,
colony, but
100%.
Yeah, we still have the slavery legacy, and we still have extreme problems in terms of inequity, racial inequity, class inequity, the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the settler state is extremely fraught. Indigenous peoples are amongst the most impoverished and marginalized in this country still. So, Canada, has a rosy international reputation that's not really well-deserved.
You said that very, very well. And sticking on to that point, you said that the Indigenous, I guess, communities are still like essentially on the lower end of the demographic. Wouldn't that essentially suggest that democracy has been a vessel for colonialists to actually just empower themselves and themselves only?
Yep. Yeah. It was. So, and again, coming back to that first question of what do we mean by democracy? Yeah. So, but yes, the notion of system that we live under, Canada, it was imported from the UK, from Britain, right? And with Parliament, and we still swear allegiance to the Queen and all that.
Yeah. To this day, am I correct?
Yeah, as Canadian citizens, yeah. Yep, to this day. And so that system, which is called liberal democracy or representative democracy, was imported or like exported from the colonial country, the England, to the colonies, including Canada, and taken up. Now, at the same time as liberal democracy was emerging, that in itself was a battle over a few hundred years. There's an evolution towards a liberal democratic system being the one that became the most popular. And that happened at the same time, over the same period that capitalism was emerging.
Perfect. I like
so that. As industrialization was intensifying. Yeah. And so and the emergence of the nation state or the idea of a state as a separate entity rather than, the modern state, the shift from feudalism towards a state with an elected government, away
an institution to govern essentially. Yeah. That's
yeah.
that's
And
really, yeah. What was you gonna say? Sorry.
that was happening at the same time as the rise of capitalism. So
Yeah, perfect. So that's
no,
actually
that's
what I was
all.
gonna
Just
ask
that
you.
that capitalism and the rise of
Came
liberal
together,
democracy.
and that's led me on to my next question very perfectly. Is if we talk about now this development of democracy, like just how capitalism essentially was like the catalyst for capitalism was the industrial revolution, mass production, like this development into consumers, etc. And like you said, the catalyst for democracy
Yep.
is this movement from feudalism and supposed empire and like supposed tribalism to the modern nation state
Monarchy.
institution. Yeah, sorry, monarchy. Perfect. So,
Yeah.
I guess who are the modern, or who should I say the forefathers of the democratic theory of democratic philosophy?
Yeah, sure. So recognize if you've studied politics, which I think you have, Moncef, John Locke,
Perfect.
Edmund Burke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the French.
Man is born free, but ever he is in chains.
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
So
no, I think you've mentioned a couple heavyweights already. Let's talk about the supposed forefather, the supposed pioneer, the godfather of supposed democracy, Mr. John Locke, with one of his most powerful, I guess, literatures, a letter concerning toleration. What's your view on that piece, may I ask?
Well, you caught me there. I have to admit I haven't read it recently. I've read Locke as an undergrad.
Me too. That's why it's still fresh in my mind.
And then, since encountered his work a little bit, but yeah. My undergraduate degree was a lot longer ago than yours. But what I can say about Locke, because I have been reading, I do read a lot on democratic theory, but more contemporary.
Okay.
And people will reference Locke, of course. And there's a wonderful book, I think I told you about it in our last conversation, called Liberalism, A Counter History by Domenico Lucerdo, who's an Italian historian. And, and he talks a lot about Locke and the rise of liberalism and the kind of arguments that were happening between different parties. And the point that he makes is that John Locke and many others who were advocates for liberalism were also advocates for maintaining class divisions, for ensuring that that workhouses were established in order to contain the poor. They were advocates for racial inequality, along the lines of we need some people to do the difficult work. So the whole point of Lucerdo's book is to highlight that liberalism, it gets equated, if people have any sense of it at all, with this idea of equality and freedom for everyone. And certainly that's in the words, but then in the practice, if you look at the other words and the other arguments made by the people who were advocating for liberalism, they're doing a lot that suggests that they didn't really believe in equality for all. And of course, pragmatically, liberal democracy in every country began as something that was only available to, the right to vote was only available to property owning men, white men. So, it excludes any, property owning. Yeah. And that's another big part of liberalism, that it's about, it's not only about equality, or even primarily about equality, it's about the protection of property, the protection of the right to people to maintain their property, and there's a piece of it also that's about keeping the state from meddling too much. And so this tension that we are constantly in between the left and the right these days about whether state resources ought to go into social services and welfare supports versus the state should keep their hands off. That's a legacy of that. The origins of liberalism also. Yeah,
that's very true. The whole should the state be allowed to interfere in the free markets? The whole that's essentially exactly. that's what spiraled into the Cold War. I mean, the West trying to hold on to this
Yep,
individualistic.
tensions between. That's right.
Sorry, it's
Freedom from state interference.
Yeah, perfect. And it would make sense that the only people who were fighting for this at that time were people who actually required that freedom from the state. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they had so much privilege in having property and being able to, sustain themselves that you can see why they'd be quite happy with a state that just protected their right to property and didn't interfere anymore. But if you didn't have property and you didn't have any of those, the kind of privileges that went with it, having a state that's actually looking out for your interests is a lot more appealing.
100%.
Your interest being, to live, to have housing, to have food. Yeah, and it's the same tension today. It's the same political tension between the left wing and the right wing.
100%, 110%. And then you kind of see like how from that John Locke, like kind of we want to be free from the state. You kind of go into maybe a more Jean-Jacques Rousseau type liberalism, democracy, which is this social contract, taking accountability, maybe actually trying to get people to actually govern and wake up to create a civic society.
Yes, create a civic society, but one that's managed. One of the interesting things about Rousseau is one of his famous books, The Education of a, I think it's the subtitle is like The Education of a Boy or something, I can't remember. But the whole focus of the book is how to educate young people to become good, governable and contributing citizens.
Oh, wow.
And that's still what education does. And in fact, the origins of widespread public education in Canada, which began in the 1870s, is, there was a desire for schooling from amongst regular people. So that was there. But the reason, or at least this is what some academics argue, and I think it's quite persuasive, the reason that desire was taken up by the state and then transformed into public education, publicly paid for education, was to manage the population. So to have a control over the young people who would be, growing up to become workers and citizens, so that, and again, they're very explicit about this in the 1870s. Most of the education in Canada was done by religious institutions or priests or ministers, that it was about raising good Christian, compliant
citizens, obedient
citizens. Yeah, and that's still what's happening. Part of the research that I'm doing, that about, where I'm interviewing young people in 5 different liberal democratic countries, including England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the U.S.
Yes.
Is asking young people about their experiences of civic learning in school.
Yes, burnt by democracy.
And I've already done this burnt by democracy. Yeah. Sorry, what was the second thing you said?
I said, how much can we talk about it? How? I guess.
Yeah.
How has it affected your thinking at the moment? Like, has it shaped any opinions? Has it changed any opinions you've had?
Yeah, for sure. I would say it's nuanced my opinions. So I don't want to call them opinions. I mean, it's actually based in evidence. So my observations or my knowledge about this, because I this research in Canada already, which is, again, talking to young people from different backgrounds about their experiences in civics education, in school in general, and their ideas about democracy and how comfortable they feel engaging in democracy and what they think democracy is, coming back to that original question. And what's true across all 5 of these countries, and myself and one of my research assistants are also looking at the civics curriculum in all 5 countries, although it's not always national. But what is happening in all 5 countries, the curriculum is not educating young people in how to be like active democratic citizens. At the most, it's teaching them how to vote, and then sort of leaving the idea of democracy as being anything beyond voting out of the discussion entirely. And then the other piece of civics education tends to be still this sort of focus on how to be a good person, how to be a good and responsible moral citizen. And it's not couched in terms of Christianity explicitly anymore. But there's still that. It's more secular, but it's similar ideas around being charitable and responsible and taking care of your neighbors. And none of those things are bad things to do. I'm not saying there's any problem with that. But if that's where we limit it, if we say, well, democracy is about being nice to your neighbor, then who is, and you mentioned this in your introduction about accountability, who is going to hold the state accountable? Who is going to demand their rights and entitlements to, for instance, welfare or housing or like higher education, which is becoming so extraordinarily expensive?
100%.
So I think, anyways, yes, this is all part of the research.
Yeah, no, and like that's it's a hitting nail on the head in terms of like how in today's age, I think what you said there definitely resonates here in the UK. Like from a young age, we're definitely taught what democracy and voting is, but never were we inspired or taught how to create a political party or how to, I guess, challenge another political party or even anything strategic.
Yeah.
You get it? Like things like that. So like I didn't even know that like being a young MP or being like part of the Young Labour Party existed until I was probably like 17, 18. And I think even like things like that are just very, very interesting. I think very noticeable, especially in different areas of the UK or London, should I say.
Yes. Well, and that's it. And again, you and I have discussed how it's very class bound still. So the school being the place, still the publicly funded place where all young people have the chance to receive an education, that means that they're only getting this bare minimum of education about democratic structures, being the focus on representative democracy, how to vote, etc. And that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that. I think that is important, but it's very limited. The young people who are able to gain the expertise that's needed to actually do more than vote, and even to have enough insight to vote strategically and in a way that is supporting their own interests. These are young people who've received this education outside of the public school system. So, and I don't just mean in private school or that kind of thing. I mean through extracurriculars, often through family who have those kinds of skills, and that makes it very class bound. It means that you have to have come from a family that has that kind of political socialization, and there are working class families who have that. There definitely are, but increasingly, it's certainly in Canada, and it looks this way in the research I've done in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK and the US. The capacity to be politically engaged is becoming more and more of an elite or relatively elite status. And so, and by politically engaged, I don't just mean formal politics. I mean, organizing,
engagement, the small things,
petitions, community engagement. Doing things that can actually shift the conditions under which people are living. Either by self-organizing around important things that the community needs, or putting pressure on the political system to change things. Those are skills that are learned and are not learned in school, and therefore tend to become quite class stratified. Meaning, to be a bit more transparent, if you're poor, you tend not to have the skills and knowledge, whereas if you're more affluent, you're more likely to be exposed to that kind of education.
And then and that's a great way to put it. And then that leads on to the next part of the debate, which is what we spoke about earlier, the question of how can we give people who aren't on the equal level of intellectual understanding of so many things the right to vote on decisions which
Mm-hmm.
affect livelihood
Mm-hmm.
and like things on such a huge scale. What do you think? Like, what do you think about
Mm-hmm.
this?
Mm-hmm.
Like this criteria. Like, how do you think we should? Like, do you even think like if we are agreeing that everyone is free and equal, do you even think that there can be this? No, you can't vote because of a certain thing, or do you think there has to be something for like that for us to actually get better
Mm,
politicians?
yeah. Right. That's a great question. And I thought, the example you gave of Socrates, believing that was a really powerful way to start the discussion.
Also, sorry, before you even let me throw
Mhm.
them a little
No,
bit
go
more
ahead.
context about Socrates, just to even to hammer home that
Yeah.
point. He was actually against it, so he was actually thrown in court for supposedly trying to
Mhm.
corrupt the youth,
Mhm.
like against the supposed democratic idea, and the jury voted him 52 to 48, and he was actually condemned to death. So even at that
Mhm.
point, as we're seeing today, anyone who supposedly is either against democracy or against what is the norm becomes a radical thinker, or is like a conspiracist, or
Mhm.
just supposed
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
crazy, or just, oh, you didn't know what you're talking about. It still leads on to the main question, which is, how do you then fit that criteria of this person knows what they're talking about and this person can or should vote?
Yeah. So huh, how do I want to say this? I think if we want to live in a democratic society, and we need to consider what we mean by democracy, back to that original point.
Fair.
And this
Fair.
isn't just from me. This is also what a question I've been asking most of the young people I've spoken to, not all,
Okay.
but what they think democracy is, what their definition of
Yeah.
and it's a version of, for those who have given it some thought, and this is mostly coming from people, well, this is entirely coming from people who have had that extra kind of political education I was talking about, because otherwise what's happening is it will just, the definition will just be, if there's anything, it will be like from the school books,
Okay, that's interesting.
well, democracy is the right to vote or
like
whatever.
like a generic understanding.
And again, I'm not opposed to that, but generic, that's right. So the people who have given it more thought and had the opportunity to give it more thought, would say something like democracy is, the right of everyone to have a say in their life, which is different than the right to vote, right?
Yeah, very, very different.
Now, voting is one means by which we can set up a democratic system to try and give everybody a relatively equal opportunity to express, that's right, a choice. But the problem with voting, and this is a problem that stems also from liberalism and its assumptions, is that it's very individualized. So liberalism is also about it's about the individual, right? Mm-hmm. So the roots of liberalism being about property rights and the individual man being allowed to vote to protect his property. It sees people, and this is bound up in law and the way our whole legal system is set up. It's about an individual and the responsibility that they have to the society, which is the collective. But it's seen as belonging within the individual, and that can be very important. Again, I'm not saying we need to get rid of that, but it's also not. It also doesn't reflect the reality that people belong to social groups, right? Whether that's their family, that we live in interaction with others, that we are not isolated entities who are making decisions. There's also in liberalism this really strong focus on rationality, and I'm putting air quotes around that. The idea that we can just sort of use our brains to think through the problems and come to the most rational solution. Again, that's not actually how people work. People work through
so many other factors,
being shaped by the ideas of their friends and their family, and so many other factors, their emotions, their well-being, their mental health,
chemical imbalances. Like there's so many different things that affect our everyday choice.
Yeah, so many different things. Poverty, right? Like the way in which people get forced into certain decisions that seem rational at the time because that's the only, range of choices that they might have.
Yeah.
Desperation. So, this idea of the rational individual making a reasoned, independent choice that has nothing to do with their family or their social situation is a myth. And it's a very deeply embedded myth in liberalism and liberal democracy. And that's why it gets translated, democracy gets translated into being about voting. So
100%.
if we don't think democracy is just about voting, then what is it? And what are the mechanisms through which to expand it? Is it making sure everyone can vote? Well, maybe. I mean, I think that's a start, given that voting is our proxy. But is it also about giving everyone access to a meaningful education that allows
100%.
them to have the skills that then allow them to be part of a collective and a community and contribute to society? Is it about, reducing inequality? And that's the other big piece about democracy that many of the young people who are engaged in this work have talked about, and this is kind of the core of the book I'm working on, is that can we have a democracy in societies that are so unequal? Inequality has been growing again in these same 5 countries that we've been talking about, which all have these liberal democratic systems. Inequality, that is the division between those at the bottom and those at the top, has been growing and growing and growing for decades. And that's because of decisions that have been made by government about, that have been propping up capitalism, supporting the free market at the expense of the social welfare state. And that had really concrete consequences. So now, can we even say we're living in a democracy when there's so much rampant inequality and homelessness and COVID, the pandemic, is really kind of bringing all of this. I think any of us who are paying attention knew it was like this already, but it's made it at least part of public dialogue more in
100%.
Canada anyways. I don't know if that's happening in England.
No,
Yeah.
definitely is happening here. And I think something you touched upon, which is very interesting, was the idea of decisions that, like you said, there are so many factors which affect us and our choices. And I think what's even more rife, or what's even more scary, is that it is very evident through like contemporary media, etc., that the upper echelons, the government, actually manipulate this, because we're now like the most common arguments for like Brexit have been like immigration, have been like the loss of jobs, arguments that tap into the emotional side of the human, if any, also, well, I would argue the survival part of the human, because even though it's xenophobic, the whole like self-preservation, evolutionary argument that the man will always put himself first, when the arguments are that jobs are being taken and it's are people coming to take your family and your communities and just spend your benefits, things that affect your survival and your betterment, like, and these arguments are pushed throughout the whole country. And even what's even more interesting is that you won't even see these arguments on the Daily Telegraph or like a supposed like a middle class or supposed upper echelon media paper. You'll see this in the Sun. You see this in like outlets that people, that media knows what kind of people are going to read this. So it's, if anything, it's very evident in today's age that actually choice is manipulated and twisted. And I think that leads us on to what you said about your research and the research you're doing now about how we are literally almost being burnt by democracy. This idea of free choice, free markets, free media, no regulation. This can I say this, that has burst, that's been the vessel for this misinformation, for polarization, for rational ignorance and lack of accountability. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the media definitely have a lot to what do I like to take responsibility for in that. And I think what's true in the UK and is true in Australia and is true in Canada and it's true in the US. I don't know New Zealand as well on this case, but that media have increasingly been concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people, right? And of the more and more wealthy. So in Canada, anyways, our kind of center, somewhat leftish national paper compared to our more sort of right-wing populist paper, they're both owned by millionaires, right? Like they're both all of these. Yeah. Well, you have the
Mr. Murdoch,
Rupert Murdoch, and exactly. So so that and that doesn't mean that there's still diverse journalists. It doesn't create. It's not a conspiracy, I guess, is what I want to say. It's not that it has been intentionally set up that way, but it has inadvertently become that way because media, it's private media anyways, is a money investor, and underwent a whole system of monopolization, a whole process of monopolization.
Yep, 100%.
That was about expanding profits. And again, we both have public radio stations still, CBC and BBC there. But even looking into the CBC, like it's publicly owned, and so it's a different model. But I do this exercise with my classes to look and see who owns and who benefits from the different media outlets, and the CEO of CBC is still making like $300,000, which is 150,000 quid a year, which is a lot of money. And you can imagine how, it's a lot for Canadian, I think, for a public broadcaster, and probably they have to be paid that well because otherwise they're going to get pulled by the private media sector, right? So I can imagine CBC and BBC having to argue, well, we have to pay well, otherwise we won't get any of the talent. So it skews who is shaping the news.
Yeah, break it down to me. You said did you say the broadcaster or the COO is making 150,000?
The CEO, like his salary.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. I would expect a bit more from a head of like of CBC. Do you know what I mean? Of like a.
Oh, would you? Yeah.
That's. I'm quite surprised.
Of a public broadcaster. Yeah.
To be fair, like you said, it's a public model.
Yeah.
No, to be fair, like I said, it's a public model, so it's not like it's a different model to the monopolized corporations of like the Murdochs, the Fox News, the Sky News. So it is a different context. Yeah. So that would make more sense, to be honest. But sticking into your research, because we haven't really touched too much on that. Let's talk about Olympic housing legacies in London, gentrification and displacement of working class communities. I think me being like an East London baby, coming from Algeria, living in Newham, going to Waltham Forest, back to Newham, like the work really resonated with me in terms of you touched on things that were literally affecting my communities, my friends, day-to-day life for people. And most exciting, like we saw this happen like from Stratford and Newham and Leighton and Walthamstow not looking that nice, so all the main roads looking nice and painted and pretty, and new buildings in the nice places, and Stratford, the new Stratford village, but then you look over and the other side of Stratford is still a shambles, unfortunately. Talk to me about your findings, about your conclusions. Talk to me about the process of that research.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So that project, which I finished it in 2013 in terms of doing the field work, and the book I wrote came out in 2015. So it's prior to the Burnt by Democracy stuff we've been talking about. That involved talking to young people in 2 Olympic cities. So Vancouver, where I was living at the time, was going to be hosting the 2010 Winter Olympics. And so I was talking to homeless and kind of marginally housed young people before the Winter Games, so in 2009, during the Games 2010, and after the Games 2011, and then did the same thing in London, so 2011, 2012, 2013, in Stratford. And focusing on the London findings, there are some similarities and some differences between London and Vancouver, but one of the big differences was just how intense the gentrification pressures were in London. That was happening in Vancouver, but it wasn't felt as acutely in at least where I was doing the research, which was in the downtown core.
What do you mean by it
But
wasn't felt as
in
much?
London, in Newham, and it. So what happened in Vancouver was, so Vancouver was already in the middle of a condo boom, right? Like lots and lots of condo
Housing
high rises
development,
going
yeah.
up. Yeah, housing development, and Vancouver was already an incredibly affluent city with pockets of poverty. Where the youth were that I was talking to, they would be I would access them in downtown Vancouver, which is very affluent because that's where the shelters were, but it was not where they would end up living. So when we would, for instance, talk to them or walk around with them, they weren't remarking upon, say, stores suddenly getting priced out of their reach, although we recently did talk about the cost of housing going up. But in London, in Stratford, because the Olympics was happening right in the middle of that community or off to the side of it, and, and that new postal code was created.
Yeah, E20.
And yeah, E20, and that whole, all of the rhetoric around regeneration of Stratford, like it was all about that very impoverished community being sort of improved and lifted up, like that was the entire focus of it. So immediately, the effects of that were felt by the young people in terms of the shops. Like even the year before, seeing different shops that used to be affordable shutting down and being replaced by higher end shops, and seeing prices go up. Yeah. So that was just a lot more kind of visible and present in their everyday lives than it was for Vancouver youth. But yeah, and I think like everything you just mentioned about watching the city or the region, the area, Stratford, be beautified, but in a very surface kind of way, like the gum being scraped off the pavement and flowers being put everywhere, and but that wasn't actually addressing the actual needs in the community. You know, 100%. Like everyone was happy to have, you know, the pavements evened out, you know, like that was nice, but it didn't address the need for more jobs or more housing or, you know, less police violence or not, you know, or harassment.
Like if anything,
and you know, and actually, like, go ahead.
So I was gonna say, if anything, it was just a bit less of a step, towards like to get off the road. But I think what just to quote someone, Leslie, who said something really powerful in your research, which I think encompasses what we were talking about just now, about this whole fact that all they did was make a nice little cinema and clean the gum, was that essentially she says, or he, sorry, my biggest fear was that Stratford City would be what it says for itself, a city within a city, which then provides an invisible barrier because you've got the people that go to Westfield with £1,000 and spend money, and you've got what my friend said earlier, he's a window shopper. He'll go there because he hasn't got money, and that instantly that will spark tension, potentially hatred, because you've got what I can't have, which I think it literally hammers home this point. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think the way in which it made the inequality between the haves and the have-nots really apparent and really up against each other is one of the legacies of the London Games, you know, because of how they went about the development. It was all, you know, focused on first building Westfields and then building the E20, you know, and
of course
there was already, like in 2011, there was already all sorts of development going up. And then directing tourists away from old Stratford. So Stratford that had been promised all of this, you know, these benefits, you know, they'd have to suffer through the construction, but it would all be worth it because there would be so much money from tourists, and, you know, and their community would flourish. Well, no, because the tourists didn't go there. Literally. In fact, the shops on the Stratford side, you know, they lost income during the Olympics because people who didn't want to go to the Olympics were staying away, and anyone who was going to the Olympics got directed through Westfields and into E20. So yeah, 100%. So the Stratford, the community didn't benefit.
And unfortunately, I see that to this very day, because I literally go through the small Stratford Mall every Sunday when I'm walking towards Morrison's, and you will not see a new
Yep.
store last for longer than 8 months, 9 months. Like, there's no business
Yeah.
development.
Yeah.
The market, the only shops
Yeah.
that will be full and will be full, and the queue will be as long as like the whole store itself is Lidl. Do you get
Mm.
it? And apart
Is
from that,
is which one?
Lidl,
Is
which is like I don't know if you have it in
which,
Lidl. It's like a superstore. They just sell like food, literally like a supermarket.
no.
It's just like a
Oh
typical
yeah.
like a
Yeah.
Walmart or
Oh yeah.
something,
Yeah.
and that's the only store
Yep.
that is
Okay.
busy.
That wasn't there when I was there. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And and that was happening. And Westfield hadn't opened when we first started talking to young people
Mm.
in 2011. And so it was really interesting to hear, and the young people we were working with they did like photo diaries. So a lot of them took pictures of the construction of Westfield
Yeah.
and pictures of that old Stratford Mall, and would say, like, look how all these shops in the Stratford Mall are shutting down, the affordable clothing shops, and then it's going to be Westfield opening, and we're not going to be able to afford it. Now, when we went back and talked to them again in 2012 and 2013, a lot of them were using Westfield because there turned out to be a range of shops available,
Yeah, of course.
and it was a place to hang out, and there was a nice food court. But what also happened, and I don't think this was in the chapter I sent you, but one of the friends, and he was a young man we'd interviewed in 2011, he was knifed to death just a few weeks after Westfield opened,
Wow.
actually at the mall.
Wow.
And it was, it was a knife fight between young men. And so the young people felt like, what's going on here? Why are there's so much more security and police and everyone getting ready for the Olympics, and yet one of us can just get stabbed to death out in public?
Literally,
Like, what? Like, who's watching out for us?
like.
So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that brought me on to my next question, because what is the government and what did the state do in terms of shifting policy for Olympic housing and in terms of that regency? Because, like you said, they've built all this
Yeah.
amazing stuff, but how was that allowed? How was that legislated? How was that pushed without the development of other parts? Can you break that down for me?
Sorry, break down like how the original plans were developed for the Olympic housing, or how it could be improved now.
No, how were they developed? Like
the original plans?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the original, the Olympics, the London Olympics won. It was kind of a surprise win. Like, everyone thought Paris was going to win, and it's widely agreed that they won because of the legacy commitments that they made, and that is that they promised that hosting the Olympics would create better conditions, would regenerate Stratford and all that, and one of that was happening at the time. This was back in 2005, because of course the bids happened, 7 years before the games. What was happening at the time was the mayor of London at the time, Ken Livingstone, who was quite a progressive mayor, I'm sure you remember.
Yeah, of course.
Had
Livingstone.
built, and he had been part of creating a plan that included the building of a lot of social housing in the Stratford area. And Westfield also was already planned before the Olympics happened. And so the plan for the Olympics got kind of stapled on top of that London development plan. Now,
what does that mean?
So the original commitments around social housing, those commitments were already in place. That was already part of the London plan. So, in theory, if that plan had been followed, there would have been social housing anyways. But the Olympics bidding committee said, they linked it to the Olympic bid. And then what happened is, so that was the call for social housing, which at the time was housing that is at 50% of the market, right? So the rent, whatever the rent might be, social housing, which is meant to be deeply affordable, would be set at 50% of the market rent, so people can afford it.
Wow.
So what happened in the interim between 2005 Yeah, well, and what happened between 2005 and 2012 was, change in government, change in mayor, change in national government, and the definition of affordable housing, or rather, the wording for what kind of housing was going to be included under the Olympics was shifted from social to affordable, and
Social to affordable.
then and what affordable housing means is 80% of market rent.
Wow. So a big
Rather than
jump.
50%.
big
And
jump.
so it was, yeah, so it's still called affordable, and they, they claim that they kept their commitment, but in the original commitment that was made was very different than the one that was fulfilled. I am being alerted to the fact that my daughter has not come home yet. I'm going to have to go pretty soon.
Oh no,
She
that's
should be
more than
home from
fine.
school.
That's more than fine. That's a very important
Yeah.
case. I think you hit that like the nail on the head
Yeah.
there. So we won't keep it for too long. But in essence, all again sticking it onto this idea that democracy and
In essence,
the vessel of it.
you're breaking up.
Am I breaking up? Am I back? Am I back in business?
Yeah, say it again. In
All right,
essence,
cool. I was gonna
caught,
say
yes,
no. So in essence,
I caught.
this vehicle of democracy has facilitated, should I say, um, gentrification, classism, the pushing out of indigenous. I wouldn't say indigenous, but of local communities, and if anything, making it harder for those local communities. So
Yep.
it's been like to really, I guess, if we were to put this conversation on a spectrum, unfortunately, democracy hasn't been the superhero it seems to be in modern day history. Does that make
I think so, and I think back again and again to what we mean by democracy. I think the current system tends to uphold the dominant classes and uphold capitalism, and so the way in which things are playing out is very much in the interests of those groups. So from their perspective, democracy is working fine the way it is. But is this really what democracy is, or is democracy bigger that we could accomplish with kind of wider dialogue and resourcing and recognition of the difference between voting and democracy.
Of course. And I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up what might be the first part of the conversation, only because there's a loads of question for you that we're not going to get through today, because like I said, unfortunately, young Jacqueline's going to be a much more of a priority right now. So there might have to be a part two, Jackie. There might have to be a part two.
Yep.
I'll be honest.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions for you. People have been engaged. They've been enjoying it. And I don't want to take up any more of your time, but there might have to be a part two, Jackie. What do you think?
Okay. I'm open.
Amazing.
Sometime in the new year. This was fun.
100%. So I'm going to leave you because I feel like I said, younger Jackie Jr. might be a bit more of a priority, but thank you so much for coming onto the show. There's been a few comments already talking about how you've broken down some amazing points, some amazing conceptions. The research has been really home hitting. A lot of people didn't know a lot of the things you just mentioned now, but I'm going to save those questions for another episode. But Jackie, have a lovely Friday. Have a lovely weekend. If I don't, I'll talk to you before the end of the new year. So I'm not going to say happy new year to you yet, but have a lovely weekend. Okay.
Not yet. Okay. Thanks. You too.
Take care. Bye, man.
Bye.
See you
Take
later.
care.
Hey, that was Jacqueline Kennelly, academic theorist who's on the right side of the democratic debate. Let me know if you enjoyed that. Let me know if it was lit, because a lot of gems were dropped. I'm not gonna lie. If you didn't know too much about democracy, I think now you do. Now you do, mate. Now you can say been there, done that, wore the t-shirt, mate. Let me sit in a lecture hall and lecture some kids about democracy. Soon. I'm joking. This is the seed. This is the seed I've planted for you lot to understand that it's all a lie. I mean, democracy ain't but a vessel unless we make it something amazing. So you never know. I didn't even get to talk about the other alternative policies, governments, philosophies, ways of governing society, but we'll get onto that because boy, I could talk about this for days until we find the right solution, because democracy, it ain't true, baby girl. It ain't true. But on that note, guys, have a sick Friday evening. I'm gonna see you guys very, very soon. Let me know what other episodes you want, because the ones we've got few, coming up are gonna be crazy already. But I want to know what you guys want already. Do you know what I mean? I want to know like what you guys are into. But also, don't worry, I'm gonna feed you with the gems, the knowledge, the seeds that are gonna make you wake up and stop whizzing through life and not questioning why are we here, how do we get here, and where are we going. My guys, good night, take care, stay safe, bye bye.